So today we're talking all about transformational anarchists. So first question has to be, what are they?
Okay, so transformational anarchists are people who are not particularly interested in the rules and see better ways of doing things or different ways of doing things. I think that would, yeah. And they're constantly looking to change the way things are done.
You could look at transformational anarchy as being on a continuum. When you look at how change works in organizations, typically the most heard phrase that you will ever come across is change management. And certainly from Holos's perspective, we kind of view the term change management as being a bit of a contradiction in terms, because change is by its nature pretty chaotic, and so to try and manage it is a bit like asking a bucking bronco to do dressage, particularly in the time of COVID, and actually previously in disruption. So there's probably a continuum with three main locations on the continuum. You've got at the left-hand side, you've got the change managers of the world who they might like a bit of process. They're probably interested in how to fit in an organization. They want to do it in line with strategy. They've probably been told to do that kind of change. And so they execute in line with those expectations. That would be change management. Then in the middle of the continuum, you've got the change agent. Now, this is somebody who's, again, probably inside a large organization, but is much more interested in suggesting interesting changes. So they can see problems with the system. They can see where if you change this, tweak this knob over here, then that might have an effect over there, and that would be very interesting and beneficial to the organization. And they typically come up with those changes, and they talk about those things. And if they're particularly motivated, they might even initiate it themselves. But both of those two categories, if you like, both interested in change, both can execute quite well, are not really the transformational anarchist. Transformational anarchist, as Neil says, is somebody who can, of their own volition, and quite likes breaking things in order to create something new. And they may not really respect the history in order to do that.
And organizations, they can struggle in organizations too. So there are plenty of them in corporations or other big organizations, but they culturally, they can find it quite difficult to fit in.
Okay,
which is why we call them transformational anarchists, because essentially they're of that character, and they love change, and they find it very exciting, and they can see brilliant and new ways to do things, and typically they'll also follow a vision. So they might also be leaders in their own right as well, which loops us back into this idea of them also being leaders.
So to my mind, these are people that disrupt business models before other people do it to them. So the classic example that springs to my mind is probably the likes of Steve Jobs or someone like that. Would you put him in the transformational anarchy group?
Absolutely, a visionary transformational anarchist, and certainly if you look at the early days, the first coming of Steve Jobs, he was unruly and anarchic. In the second coming, he was a bit more disciplined, but he was deeply unpopular in the organisation that he created the first time around.
And are transformational anarchists always unpopular, or do they sometimes have
the way we look at it is that in conventional organisations where the priority is reliability, then inevitably transformational anarchists are going to be unpopular because they're disrupting things by their very nature. Once you get into more transformational organisations, once you get into organisations that are more used to, more adapted to transformation, then transformational anarchists are often appreciated, much more appreciated. And the problem with the first coming of Steve Jobs was that he appointed John Scully as chief executive, who was previously the chief executive of PepsiCo, which is a deeply conventional organization. And it was in that environment that Steve Jobs was so unpopular, because he was continuing to be the transformational anarchist entrepreneur. And unusually, he had an awful lot of authority and power.
And Mark, you worked with Al Gore. So would you put him in the Transformational Anarchy group? And
I
if
would,
so,
put
why?
Al Gore, I would definitely put Al Gore. It's a bit of a stretch to say I worked with Al Gore. I was trained by Al Gore in a room, so I never actually met him, but I was in the same room as him, and he trained me for 3 days on how to be a climate reality leader, which is an organisation that he started. So, so if you remember Al Gore's story, he tried to become the president after being the vice president very successfully, and was pipped to the post by George W. Bush in a legal battle, which was sort of particularly bitter for him. But then he sort of thrashed around and didn't really know what to do with himself. And after that, created an inconvenient truth, and thereafter the climate movement amongst politicians. So given that what he was talking about was fairly heretical at the time, and is still problematic for many governments and senior political figures, he is definitely a transformation anarchist, but he does it within the lines. You know, so he follows the contours, he brokers power, he gets networks moving, he recruits people, he does it in ways which are recognizable, but he is definitely trying to break the paradigm, and in that sense qualifies. Yeah.
As a transformational anarchist. So let's think of some others. Let's go into history. Who would you say is a historical transformational anarchist?
Brunel, Isabel King of
Okay.
Brunel. You know, again, you know, totally disruptive, quite willing to change things, dabbling in all sorts of different areas, so ships and trains, you know, highly inventive, drove his shareholders absolutely nuts, you know, but you know, wanted, totally driven to change the way things are done. And if you've ever been to SS Great Britain in Bristol, you know, they got 3/4 of the way through building it, and he came across this as a paddle steamer, and he came across this idea of screw propulsion, and you know, doubled the budget by converting the ship from paddle steamer to propeller, and the shareholders went nuts.
And that's what they do. They generally send people a bit nuts. So the sort of the biggest example possibly in history, slightly contentious, sorry for this, but Jesus was a transformational anarchist. So he battled the whole of ancient Rome, which was a paradigm of control and mostly fear, and the prevailing religious structures of the time in order to promote a message of love. And that was transformative in its time. And it wasn't just him, but then other people took up the call, and off they went. And that's what tends to happen, is that they create followers who believe in the same things, and they go and they propagate the message at the same time as well. But it's important to state that don't feel that you've got to be Gandhi or you know, Nelson Mandela in order to be a transformational anarchist. It's definitely occurs at every level in society. So you can be a transformational anarchist at a middle manager in an organization just as much as you can be a Jobs or a Brunel. You know,
another example would be Ada Lovelace, who wrote the very first computer program. Working, Charles Babbage would never have been able to achieve what he achieved with mechanical computers if it hadn't been for Ada Lovelace. And again, she drove him nuts. he struggled to give her the credit that she really deserved for doing that.
And so really, I suppose, going back to Mark's point, the whole point of this is really to bring the tribe of transformational anarchists together, really, and give each other support. Is that the plan?
I think so. I mean, you know, I think, you know, we've gone on a lot about how they drive people nuts. I mean, I think on the whole they're underappreciated, and so, to some extent that's because they're not quite as skillful as they might be. So they're very driven to make these changes, but they could potentially, I mean, maybe in that Al Gore example, they could potentially do it in a more inclusive, more skillful way, which gets them more traction. And that's the purpose, is really to help transformational anarchists be transformational in a good way and effectively.
Okay, so you talk a lot about authentic leaders in quite a lot of your work, in your book, Stealing from the Future and How You Can Stop It. So there is this sort of transformational anarchists can be authentic leaders, but they're also transformational anarchists that aren't authentic leaders, right? So how would you sort of partner up those two concepts?
Well, so going back to that original point, that transformational anarchists are those who they're not terribly interested in the rules, but they are very interested in transformation. So Donald Trump qualifies as a transformational anarchist, but isn't an authentic leader because he doesn't enable the authenticity of those around them, and he prioritizes loyalty over competence, and he's stealing from the future.
And so who would be a sort of authentic leader and a transformational anarchist? Who would be both of those things, do you think, in today's world?
In today's world,
there is a case for Jacinda Ardern, who's the Prime Minister of New Zealand. And although she, on the face of it, she's not especially visionary or necessarily transformational, actually what she's doing is she's rewriting the rules on what authentic leadership looks like. No, maybe not rewriting the rules, more about promoting and making it really visible that that authentic leaders are not weak. They are not, they don't lack strength. In fact, what they do is they work through collaboration and a profound sense of self-awareness, but also they follow a vision at the same time. And so it's that peculiar combination that creates a whole raft of things, which I don't know what I'm talking about at this point, so I'll have to edit this bit out.
Blooper reel.
I think Jacinda Ardern is, I mean, she is a transformational anarchist in the sense that she is breaking a lot of conventions of political leadership. But she's not as disruptive as some others. She's definitely an authentic leader, though.
Okay.
You probably find more transformational anarchists. I mean, certainly in famous transformational anarchists would tend to be more visionary or ruler style leaders rather than authentic style leaders. So they would tend to be more in that visionary camp. So someone like Elon Musk, that whole thing about being a nightmare to work with, but enriching the future, and being super disruptive. That's very much the transformational anarchist space. Whereas Jacinda Ardern is disruptive. She's disruptive because she's embodying authentic leadership so powerfully and challenging a lot of the conventions of political leadership by doing it. But she's not explicitly setting out a vision for this is how leadership should be done. She's just doing it.
So
really, others are imposing that on her. So others are saying this is how leadership should be done, which is very interesting because in this time of global crisis in leadership, she is showing a way, amongst other women leaders, it must also be said, the Prime Minister of Taiwan and Angela Merkel also sort of both qualify in this regard, as showing this new way of leading during crisis. And other people are going, look, you can do it like that. And that is transformative in itself.
A good example, actually, of an authentic transformational anarchist leader in the public eye would be Greta Thunberg. Very much a transformational anarchist, and also extremely authentic. Not in that visionary way, because she's not such a nightmare to work with, but very much authentic transformational anarchist.
And she focuses, I mean, it sounds to me like they focus a lot more on action. So a transformational anarchist might get a little bit frustrated with the status quo, and they're seeing things in a different way. They can adapt quite quickly. They can move things forward. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely, and really restless with the status quo. I mean, they're just constantly driven to tinker with it. Absolutely.
Constantly evolve. So I suppose right now in the time of COVID-19 coronavirus, is this a time that transformational anarchists can really thrive?
Well, yeah.
Or do you think they'd be hibernating? It is huge change, isn't it? Everybody's grappling with it.
Yeah, I get, and it depends what it depends on their particular situation, but for, you know, any sort of big disruption is an opportunity. You know, a lot of the status quo is already being challenged. A lot more people are experimenting. I mean, you know, imagine a year ago trying to say, actually, we should move to virtual schooling. You know, people would have thought you were completely nuts. But the fact that you know, many schools were able to do it in just a few weeks. I mean, broadly over the Easter holiday, schools adapted to virtual schooling. Bang. So that opens the window for transformational anarchists to experiment with other things too.
I mean, I take your point. I think that you have to be careful in times like this, particularly during extreme crisis where there's loss of life and so on. And, you know, high degrees of control and high degrees of understanding the situation and getting it to a place where it's manageable is also absolutely required. And so those skills are required. And actually what we're noticing in some of the other sort of strongmen type leaders around the world is that they're not managing to do that, and so their version of control and peace and security is being transparently shown to be a lie. However, as Neil says, the opportunity comes a bit later. So if there's any hibernation of transformational anarchists at this point, they're probably sort of working out how can I have my most of my impact once the virus passes. So you have to be aware of the timing as well. You can stretch people, but you have to stretch people as much as they can stand. And at the moment, there's probably enough stretching going on.
So there's a level of emotional intelligence really that's needed.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
so it's almost
I'd pull back slightly on that. I think it's, you know, in the first moment of trauma where everyone's in shock, I think that, you know, that is not the time. But as things start, we don't have to wait to the end to start changing things. But as the shock subsides, as that trauma subsides, and you start to see opportunities, positive opportunities to make a difference, take advantage of the way things are. You know, so for example, maybe there's some opportunities in the diminution in the reduction in air travel. Maybe there's some opportunities there for transformation anarchists to rewrite the way business is being done, and to some extent that's happening. You know, there's a lot more effective video conference work going on. So you know, at that small scale of transformational anarchy, there will be people in companies making the VC world work well enough that international business travel might well be impacted forever.
But at the same time, it's got to happen, you know. So a lot of people talking about, well, it's going to be very different after COVID-19. Well, it won't be unless the anarchists mobilize and create that difference at the end of it, yeah. Right? So otherwise, it will go snap straight back into, you know, high growth and all of those money-orientated issues which we're very used to. So unless there is leadership of another kind, it won't change.
So you're working with transformational anarchists. That's how you've sort of profiled them and come up with this idea of transformational anarchy. And then you're working with authentic leaders as well to improve themselves and improve their teams and organisations, their local communities, etc. What one piece of advice would you give to transformational anarchists and authentic leaders right now?
So just to be clear, it's transformational anarchists who hire us. They're the ones who appreciate our message, and we work to increase the amount. We work to create universal authentic leadership. So we see a big solution. Authentic leadership as creating a better world, better business, better everything. So we want to enable authentic leadership. I think what the message to transformational anarchists would be, you know, keep learning, keep improving your skills, keep improving your influencing skills, don't be beaten down, find new ways to navigate the system and create the breakthroughs. And I guess in a way the same is for the authentic leaders. You know, trust yourselves, believe that authenticity is the right way, in spite of, you know, whatever culture you happen to be operating in. If that isn't supportive of authentic leadership, believe in authentic leadership as the best way to create sustained success.
Don't think there's any more to say, is there? That's just a lovely end, really.
Okay, shall I stop the recording?
Yeah.